Today on Abrasive and Product Live, it's Turning Thursday, and we're talking part 2 Ladle Chuck. If you didn't see this video last week's video, we're talking about ladle chucks. As you can see, I got a contraption going on here, and we're going to talk about how to use it. So far, what I've done, just to recap on last week, we turned pretty much a spindle, so a handle and then some form of ball. And what we're doing this week is we're mounting it into the chuck body itself. Now, if you look on this camera, it's a little bit of a contraption here. There we go. It's a little bit of a contraption here. And first, before we get into actually turning this piece here, I want to talk about the jigs it comes with. So this kit comes with actually a whole bunch of different jigs. I just grabbed these two as an example. But before we mount onto the lathe, we want to figure out what jig will work for what size cup on the lathe we're doing. So as you can see here, if I stuck this behind here, it's a little too small, and we wouldn't have much of a cup there, and also it'd slip around. So what we're looking for is something like this one. So if we take the cup and put it in that little recess right there, it doesn't really move around, and that's kind of what we're after, because we want that secure on the lathe, especially when we get something along like this one. This one's about 12.5 to 13 inches, so it's a little on the bigger side. Now these also have a cutout right there, and what that's for is so you can stick the handle through like that, and then you can offset. So actually I had that backwards. So you can have it offset like that. And so when you're actually using the ladle, it would be the cup of the ladle would be more like that. Personally, I prefer to stick the handle behind it, kind of like this. That way, like this one, it's more flat. It's just personal preference, but they do have that cutout there for that offset if you're after that. So now that we've covered what you're looking for, I want to talk about handles. So I didn't really cover this last week, but if you don't have a big lathe like this big Rikon here, the bigger lathes will handle this chuck better than the smaller lathe, especially this one right here. You can see it's kind of huge. Today when we were setting up for this video, the handle we turned last week was actually about an inch and a half long for the lathe we first brought back here. You can see it's kind of long here. So we brought back the lathe we had last week, and it actually has a sliding bedway. This is the Rikon lathe, the new one. Excuse me. It actually has a sliding bed, and as you can see, I got the gap here, and that allows for that handle to kind of swing. So if you have a bigger lathe, this chuck is pretty awesome. But if you do have a small lathe, you can still use this. You just got to do something like I did here. What I did here is I turned these in two pieces, and I took a bottle stopper threaded insert that we sell for bottle stopper pin turning or whatever. I drilled a 1/2-inch hole, glued that in there. I found a matching thread pattern in my junk nuts and bolts box, cut it off with a cutoff wheel, and glued it into a handle. You can see these are two different woods. This is African mahogany, this is Babinga, so you can kind of mix and match. So even if you had a ladle bowl that you really like, but you want a little longer handle, you can make a couple different handles for the same size ladle cup. So that's just a little tip for you guys who have smaller lathes like myself at home. I got a 14-inch lathe, so that right there is just a little too big for me. So we got everything mounted. We've chosen our front plate. Now we want to tighten things up. One tip, I'm going to go back to the one I had in the video a minute ago, or in this camera. One thing I do want to note about this, if you over tighten, you can mar up, as you can see actually right there, you can mar up the softer woods like this African mahogany. I have 4 dents all the way around from the contact points. So just a little note about that. You can mar up the wood if you overly tighten them. So my rule of thumb is I'm actually going to grab an Allen wrench. That way I can hold the backside here. And my rule of thumb is just kind of, I don't know if you've ever tuned a drum or anything like that, but kind of go in a star pattern. And it doesn't take much tension. And that way you're tightened evenly all the way around. You don't want to overly crank these because of you can tighten it too much and snap them. And I'm probably good about now. Yeah. There's a little setup to these chucks. That's the only downfall, is they are a little tedious sometimes. Okay, so first things first, safety glasses on. Now for this kind of project right here, especially with this long handle here, I'm spinning in like a second gear range. On this lathe, it's a 50 RPM to 1700 RPM. That way I have enough torque from the motor. This is a 3 horsepower motor. I have enough torque from the motor for this big offset. And also I'm spinning fast enough for spinning in the middle, or turning in the middle of the spindle here. So that's just my little tip. First, we want to make sure that when I spin this around, I am not hitting anything. And so my tool rest here is quite far away, so I'm all good there. I'm actually going to move it out a little bit because the tool I'm using next, I want a little space in there. And I'm not hitting the bed of the lathe, and we're all good there. So turn the lathe on, starting it out, moving slow. As you can see here, it's kind of a contraption and monstrosity, but we're going to start spinning the speed. And always stay behind the tool rest. That way, if this breaks, it either flies towards the wall here or flies to another wall, and nobody's hurt. And right now, I'm spinning about 750 RPM, and the lathe is moving a little bit. So I'm going to call that good for simply how much the lathe is moving. And normally, you don't want to pay attention to the RPM. Pay attention to the bed. Let the lathe tell you what it wants. So I know a lot of these new fancy lathes have a digital readout. I don't rarely use them. Just pay attention to how much the lathe is moving. Right now, it's moving a little bit. I could go a little bit higher, and it'll kind of even itself out most of the time. But just kind of pay attention to that. As I said, stay behind the tool rest. I'm going to start in the center. I'm using the Rikon Turning Set, and I'm just using a round cutter. You can use a bowl gouge if you would like, but with that dish inside this cup of the ladle, a carbide tool is just going to be easier. So I'm going to stop the lathe real quick so I don't hurt myself. So the tool rest right now, I'm a little above center. And for starting out, that's just fine because I'm actually going to take the handle of my tool, if we can get the shot here, and I'm going to raise, no, the front one. I'm actually going to raise the handle up just slightly, and that way, essentially, that makes my regular basic round cutter act like a negative rake scraper. So I'm a little above center, and then when I move my handle up, I'm on center. So that's what I'm doing right now. Turn the lathe back on, turn the RPM down, work my way back up. Excuse me. Back at about 750 to 800 RPM. And I'm just going to start turning. And with this chuck, I'm spinning in forward. I'm not spinning in reverse. You could spin in reverse if you would like, but I always try to be in the practice of spinning the lathe in forward. It's just something I always do. This chuck itself does have set screws, so if you do prefer to work like this, you can. But normally, I feel more comfortable spinning in forward. Move a little bit at a time. just taking off the top part of there. The carbide cutter I'm using here is a little on the dull side. It's not cutting like I would like it. Now, one thing to note here, as I'm working closer to the chuck itself, I'm going to turn off the lathe so you can see what I'm talking about. So one thing to note, you want to be careful about how close you get this wall to here. Because this is like a Delrin resin material of some sort, you can cut this, and it's okay if you do cut it, but you want to keep your tools lasting longer. So just be very careful when you get close to the edge here. Just a little sidebar there. Turn the lathe back on behind the tool rest, and I'm back to turning at the RPM. As I say, just be careful when you get close to there. Take off that center point there. This thing kind of sounds like a helicopter when it's going around. Now I'm going to turn off the lathe. With this offset and this handle flying around, I really want to turn off the lathe, because now I'm going to move the banjo forward just a little bit. That way I can get closer to the actual piece I'm cutting there. Turn the lathe back on. And with this project, guys, you just really want to take your time and really be safe, because I can see the shadow right here of where this handle is spinning, but if I get too close to it, you will hurt yourself. This lathe right here is a 3 horsepower motor. It will hit you hard and hurt you. So just be safe, guys. Normally, I would especially have a face shield on for a project like this, but for the sake of the video, I do not, so you can hear me. And one thing, now that we're starting to work on the cup of the bowl itself, we want to start paying attention to how the cup is actually shaped. So if you look at this one here, I'm actually recessed into the cup body itself. And so as I'm going in this way, and then slowly working my way out. But I want to really pay attention to that thickness there.
Chris, could you potentially use a Forstner bit to mill away the bulk of your material to get that hole started?
You could, but you really want to be careful with that. Simply because most of the time when you're using a Forstner bit, you want to hold that Jacob's chuck and make sure the Forstner bit's not spinning. And with this kind of project, I just really recommend doing this all with your tool. You can do a Forstner bit if you feel comfortable with it, but for your first couple ones, really use your tools and kind of stay away from this while it's spinning. Does that kind of help your question there, Chris?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Turn it back on. As I said, I'm going to start paying attention to the thickness. Another thing about the Forstner bit, going back on a sidebar a little bit, is in doing so, you'd have to pay attention to how far the Forstner bit went in because it's got that little bitty point on the end of it, you could potentially go all the way through the cup. So, and or you can end up with that staying on the inside of the bowl because of you don't want to go too thin and blow out the bottom, if that kind of makes sense. So I'm going to start going turn again. And this is the exact project exact same piece of wood that we turned in last week's video. So it's not the most perfectly round cup as you would really want to, but as for these videos, trying to keeping them simple and straightforward, we wanted it to just be okay with that oval shape. Also, having a light for this project would really help. That way you could see in what's going on in this area of it, and just kind of pay attention to where you're at. One thing to note about this kind of project, going kind of backwards a little bit, with that big handle hanging off there, I have seen some projects, especially like these, where the handle will just give up and fly off. So if you do this kind of project, just really keep it out of harm's way from anybody or any kind of window, especially if you have a window in your shop. Did we have a comment there, Chris?
We did. Jerry wanted to know if he'd never seen a chuck like that and wanted to see if he could purchase it from us, and he certainly can.
Yeah, you can. It's actually on our website. This is the Ron Brown's Best Ladle Chuck. Ron is a great guy, and he's producing high-quality chucks and tools, and he is a wood turner, and he's producing these chucks because he's seen the market out there of people looking for something that'll make this easier. Normally in the past, if you turned a ladle like this, you would have to turn a wooden block jam chuck, and each chuck would be different, or each ladle would be different than the chuck, so you'd have to make a bunch of chucks. Well, with this kit, as you can see, it's got high quality bolts on here, and you can pretty much bolt this plate to the to essentially a faceplate. And everything's all nice and secure, and you can reuse it and get a lot of life out of it. So this is a really cool chuck, really high quality, really well thought out. I'm a pretty big fan of it. Unfortunately, on my small lathe at home, I can't use it as often as I would like. Maybe when I get a big lathe like this, I'll use it a whole lot more and make some Christmas presents for the family. So what I just did there is I got pretty close to the chuck body itself, because I'm a little over. The cup of the ladle is a little bit more oval than I would like. I'm going to get pretty close to the chuck. That way I get rid of some of that oval shape, and it just make it look more clean and uniform. And then when I got close to the chuck, I just kind of rounded over in that edge there. And just make sure you don't hurt yourself with this, guys. This is also a project that you'll probably turn off and on the lathe quite a few times just to make sure you're being safe and also not blowing through the bottom of your bowl and or project. This carbide tool is a little dull on me, so it's struggling to cut out the high spot of that cup. Also having a compressed can of air will help, or a compressed air can of air or air nozzle. That way you can blow out all these shavings, because they will form up inside that recess, and as you saw there, they just all fell out. But if you have an air compressor, just blowing that out quick and easy while it's spinning is really handy. Turn the lathe back on. Get back to work. I'm going to try to crank up the lathe just a little bit so for this video we can get some things done here quickly. Right now I'm spinning about 900 RPM. This kind of project, you don't really want to go above 1,000 RPM. You can, but about 1,000 RPM, if something does fly off the lathe, that normally goes airborne above 1,000 RPM. So normally I like to keep under 1,000 RPM. So if it does fly off, it normally goes just straight to the floor and or straight to a wall. And what I'm doing now is I know I'm getting pretty thin. I'm going to turn off the lathe so all these shavings can clean out here. But I know I'm getting thin on this thickness. So what I'm doing now is I'm mainly focusing on the bottom and then smoothing things out this way. So when I take my finger and feel inside here, everything just feels consistent, and it doesn't feel like if you ever turned your first bowl, you know, it felt a little ripply. That way, when I stick my finger inside here, everything just feels nice and smooth and consistent. So that's kind of where I'm at on this project right now. I have about an inch still left on the bottom of the bowl. So you just want to keep in mind on how deep you're still going. That way you don't blow out the bottom, because if you blow out the bottom, then your project's all wasted right at the very end. So I'm getting full of shavings. I'm going to turn off the lathe real quick. Clean all those shavings out. Feel how thick I am. Probably got a ½ inch left. So I'm going to turn back on the lathe. And as I'm working in the center of the spindle, you normally want to spin a little bit on the higher RPM range. As I said earlier, don't go past 1,000, because you will have things go airborne if they do fly off. But especially for spindle turning, the closer to the spindle you are, the faster things will cut. That's why if you see people turning finials for boxes or whatever, they're normally spinning about 3,000 to 4,000 RPM. As fast as the lathe will normally let them go. And right about now, I'm going to start listening to the wood. You can kind of hear how different the tool's cutting. I'm going to stop talking so you can hear it. So right now, you can hear it's kind of a little thin, but as I work towards the bottom, right now, you can hear it's got a little bit more mass to it. Take off that high point in the bottom. And I'm going to say I'm probably good. Turn off the lathe and feel it real quick. Everything's cleaned out. Yeah, I'm pretty good on the bottom, but I do have a high spot right there, and right about the center point where the handle is. So I'm going to work right about there, but just keep in mind, be careful right there, because you don't want to go too thin, because sometimes you'll break that grain out and the handle will go flying. So I'm going to do one final pass, starting in the center. And really make sure you're using a flat spot of your carbide cutter. You can see this Rikon tool here, right there, has a flat spot as well as a 45. Right now I'm just using the flat spot. Start in the center, work my way out. And as I said, have the handle up, and especially for the center point, having the handle up and then working like that. Just kind of feel with that tip of the tool if there's any high spots. You can kind of listen to it as well. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but I have a slight high spot that I'm working on right now. And that's all about gone now. So make sure I have no high spot in the bottom of the bowl. And I should be done now. I'll feel it one more time. Yeah, I'm all done on that. So now the next step would be sanding. Something you can do for this project, and something you probably want for your shop, is I really recommend investing in a pair of hemostats. If you've ever seen Grey's Anatomy, they're the little bitty tweezers that have the locking mechanisms in between the two handles. And those are nice because you can clamp sandpaper. This is a trick I use at home. You can take some of this gold J-Flex sandpaper, rips right in half because it's cloth back, and then normally I would just fold it like that right there, and then clamp my hemostats on it like that, and then I would just hold it and sand the inside of this bowl. I forgot my hemostats at home, so I'm just going to try to be safe as possible with sanding. The hemostats are nice because I have my hand behind the tool rest. I know if anything does get caught, by the time I realize everything's caught, I'm pretty much letting it go, and anything happening is happening behind the tool rest, and I'm staying safe. For this project, I'm just going to sand with one grit to keep everybody happy, showing how I'm sanding, but also keeping safe. And right now, if you do decide to hand sand, I don't recommend it though. You could do this two different ways. Normally, I like to take the little bitty, I guess you can say, ears, fold those inner like that, and then take my my index finger and my middle finger and kind of hold them like that. That way, because I'm spinning about 900 RPM, I don't burn myself. So just kind of having that extra sandpaper there so I don't burn myself. And I'm going to turn off the lathe and move the tool rest. That way, if I do get a catch, I'm not hurt. And kind of stand back. That way, that handle doesn't fly off and hit you. You can kind of see in the front view here, I have my body tilted back. That way, if something flies off, it flies to the wall. We're spinning this way, so it'll probably spin right there. Hit right there. So I got my hand back. It's on my body. I know it's not wandering around. And also work on that lip. Guys, this is a little bit of a dangerous project, but it is simple. And I'm going to call it good on sanding the inside. Any tear out that I had on the inside, I did 100 grit right there. Any tear out that I did have on the inside, I pretty much got rid of with that 100 grit. With carbide tools, you normally get a little bit of tear out. And since the lathe is spinning this way, I'm going to have a bunch of rings on the inside, spinning all the way around the inside of this cup. Take my sandpaper again, and I'm just going to work back and forth to get rid of all those little bitty lines in there. And that way, when I do put finish on the inside of this cup, everything is nice and uniform. And that's 100 grit right there. You can go finer. I might actually go to, I think I got a 180 grit here. Yeah, I'm gonna do a 180 grit real quick so I can show you how I'd finish the inside. How are we doing on time, Chris?
Good.
Okay. And once I did that 100 grit, it doesn't take much in between grits. Just be quick. And right now you can kind of see, because I didn't turn this ladle itself perfectly round, I have a little bit of high spot here and it's a little bit thinner right there. That's just fine for the sake of the video. I'm not going to stress about it. I'm going to do 220 grit as well, because why not? Make sure I'm behind the lathe or behind the chuck. And it doesn't take much, and I'm done. And with this lathe especially, I'm going to let the lathe fully stop before I even get close to it, because this motor actually has a brake on it. So especially that 3 horsepower, if you have or something on it, it'll help stop that mass from spinning freely. And so on a project like this, it's kind of annoying because I'm just working in the center of the spindle, but it's nice when we do bowls. And I'm going to call it good for that inside. So now I'm going to take the same rag that I used last week, using walrus oil again, use the same finish all the way throughout the project. That way everything looks nice and uniform. I got I think this is a quart, put it in one of our Boston glue bottles. That way I can see how much I have left, and I can also see if it's separated a little bit. So just shake it up. Pour a little bit on the rag here. And while the lathe is off, wiping that in there. And it's a little tricky to do with that big handle in the way. And I'm probably just going to do this. Just pour directly inside there and keep moving the lathe. And that way it soaks into that end grain. Okay, that's working pretty good for me. One thing I did do as well, I forgot to mention it, but this ladle, the cup itself, had a bit of sapwood on one end of it, and I decided to do it at the bottom. That way when you look inside the ladle, you get that different coloration of cherry. I just thought that'd be interesting. And with walrus oil, I normally like to wipe it on while the lathe is off. I'm going to turn the lathe on because it's got beeswax in there. I want to buff it in a little bit. As I said earlier, I got my body pulled back, and because I have this rag, I don't want those little dangly things in the way because they'll get caught. So I put that in my hand, just using these 2 fingers and just buffing it in a little bit. So I shouldn't get a catch here. This kind of finish, especially on this project, you normally want to use some form of paper towel. That way if it does catch, it just tears. I don't have that luxury right now because this is all I have. So I buffed it in a little bit, and especially being in the center, it doesn't take much. Now I'm going to use the walrus oil furniture wax. As I mentioned last video, this is all food safe stuff. And it's nothing but good stuff in it, in my opinion. He sells it for furniture, but it works fantastic on food safe finishing. And this is pretty much all I use for my bowls. Just working it in there while the lathe is off, kind of letting it build up. And then I'm going to pull my body back again, turn on the lathe, make sure my containers aren't in the way on the bed. Body's back, rag in the hand, using the 2 tips of my fingers. And all I'm doing right now is letting that wax from the furniture wax just really soak into that wood. I'm going to get a little bit more. Make sure I got the rag in my hand properly. As you saw there, it twisted on me a little bit, so just get your grip. I'm going to work towards that edge, but because it's more ovular than anything, I want to be careful. That way the edge is nice and protected as well. And I should be good. So now the project is all done. Lathe is slowing down. We are all done with this project, and the only thing I have to do is take it off the lathe and give it away as a gift or sell it, whatever you want to do with it. So that is the Ron Brown Ladle Chuck. Made something pretty daggum awesome. This one's a little bit longer. It's a little bit of a hassle to take off all these screws, so I'm not going to take off the screws. We can post a video or a picture on Instagram if you want to see the final product. But we made something simple like this, quick and easy project. I used nothing but basic tools. First video I used a basic 5-piece turning set from Sorby. This video I used a carbide cutter and sandpaper. And only thing that was special about this project is the chuck itself. So yeah, that's this simple project, and we are all done. Any questions for me, Mike?
No, I got one though. Do you think it would be maybe a quick safety tip? Maybe wrap a little yellow painter's tape on the end of that handle while it's spinning as a visual reminder to where to keep your hands away.
You can do that, and I forgot to mention in the video. Actually, I do have a tip on that. So, say this short little piece right here. I'm going to move my tool rest back because it includes a tool rest. Excuse me, the tool rest needs some lubrication. I'm going to put this right here, and if we can get to this camera over here, excuse me, see how you can see this handle here. What I can do is I can take a piece of masking tape and actually put it onto the tool rest itself, and that way I know, especially when I'm turning, and we can get into that if we ever do like a wing bowl video or something like that. That way I know after that piece of masking tape, I'm out of the shot here. After that piece of masking tape this way, it's nothing but air. So if I do need to reach around the lathe, I know that yellow piece on the tool rest is a deadly point. Past that to the wall, I'm safe. That's just a little tip that I found. Chris, great question. I'm happy you brought me back to that. Any other questions for me? Nope, we're all good. So I'm Chris. It's Turning Thursday. Have a good rest of your day. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.